we are honored to have our Commissioner of Public Safety, the Honorable Sean Tyndall, with us. We've asked him to come out and give us an update essentially on all things DPS, including Capitol Police and your wish list for the session. And please just grab a microphone because they tell us over the internet they can't really hear you if you don't speak into one of these little microphones. So take it away, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I know most everybody on the committee, but for those that I don't, Commissioner Sean Tyndall, Mississippi Department of Public Safety. We've obviously gone through a lot of changes at the Department of Public Safety over the last several years, with the addition of Capitol Police and the Commercial Transportation Enforcement Division. I can tell you with Capitol Police, we're sitting at about 160 Capitol Police officers at this point. We've grown that from about 75 was where we were 2 years ago. Chief Lucky and his team at Capitol Police have really done an excellent job getting out and engaging with the community, letting them know that we're here, that we're working with our other law enforcement partners in Hinds County and JPD to try to make the capital city safer. With the expansion coming up in July 1st of this year, where our boundaries will go further north, a little bit further south, we're going to expand our coverage territory about a third. We're trying, our goal is to have anywhere between 200 and 225 officers at Capitol Police to deal with that expansion. We do have a number of cadets that are going through this basic class at Malota right now. We're asking this year for funding for 180. Our plan would be to come back the following year and ask for funding to get Capitol Police again up to 225. And we feel like that's going to be needed to cover the additional area where there's a lot of homes, a lot of businesses, and continue to provide this excellent service that I think Capitol Police has been providing. I do get calls routinely from community leaders and business leaders, Fondren, Belhaven, the new district that are really happy with Capitol Police and the job that they've been doing. We still have things that we got to work on. We're working on our 911 call center and putting those things together so that we can have better response times. But also, I'll say this, not just with Capitol Police, we're working hand in hand with, again, JPD and Hinds County, NBN, NBI, Highway Patrol. We're about to launch some saturation details throughout the city of Jackson to try to work with the city leaders on again, curbing some of the drug problems and crime that we see in the city of Jackson. But that's not just something we've done in Jackson. We've done those same efforts on the coast with NBN and NBI and trying to do these task force. We've done some in the Delta. We've done some, I think, over towards Columbus. So we've really tried to do that across the state. I think Jackson, of course, gets a lot of the attention here, but we've tried to reach out to our local law enforcement agencies to let them know that DPS wants to be a partner in what they're doing. The Commercial Transportation Enforcement Division that also came over, we've seen a lot of progress there. We're, again, working with the trucking industry to make sure that products get moved. If you remember a couple of years ago, there were a lot of issues that the trucking companies were having when the MDOT law enforcement was with them, and we've tried to work with our partners in that industry as well as our locals to ensure that we're doing good weight checks and making sure that the roads are taken care of. We've also recently started with the kind of the merger, if you will, of the Mississippi Highway Patrol's motor carrier unit with our CTED. They're going to be working together, doing enforcement. And so that's really good to see Highway Patrol and CTED working together. That was one of the concerns when they were coming over from MDOT was how that would work out. And that's been really good. NBI, we have obviously seen a lot of officer-involved shootings with the legislation that y'all passed. We've doing all those investigations across the state. It was somewhat a matter of custom, but there were times where we wouldn't get called on officer-involved shootings. Now we're called on all of them, and our officers, I think, are doing a better job as NBI agents, and we're doing more training on how to handle those. We're obviously being more transparent. We're releasing footage from those incidents. We're releasing our reports once those investigations are done. And that's because they deserve that type of public scrutiny when we're looking at those incidents to make sure we're doing the job that we need to do when it comes to investigating those occurrences. We have added traditionally at NBI, That's been made up solely of Mississippi Highway Patrolmen. And we have added outside agents to MBI for the first time. So we hired about 10 agents that have come from other agencies across the state. One of the positives with that is we were actually able to more than double the number of female MBI agents we had by recruiting from outside of the Highway Patrol ranks. And so I think that's also been a positive. And these were highly qualified investigators with years of experience and education and background that I think have been a positive for what we're doing at MBI. MBN has been doing a good job. We have seen a drop in the overdose deaths across the state. Coming out of COVID, for whatever reason, those numbers really skyrocketed. And we've seen working together with locals, doing various task force efforts, working with the feds. We had a press conference last week in Meridian where we had a pretty big roundup on a case that we had been working since 2017, working with local law enforcement and our federal partners there. Medical examiner's office, when we got here in 2020, we had a backlog of over 2,000 cases that dated back to 2010. We've all but eliminated that portion of the backlog. I wish I could tell you that everything is rosy and it's great. I mean, we still have our struggles because as it stands, we have 3 medical examiners on staff. But we've also seen a record number of homicides, and a lot of the cases that they're looking at take some time to complete. And so you do end up at times where you have a little bit of a backlog, but we are turning around the cases in a much quicker time. We're not waiting 2 years to get autopsy reports done. We're getting those in, and we're generally getting them out in a timely fashion. We've also, with y'all's help, been able to expand the staff at the ME's office so that we do have death investigators now that work in-house. We have pathology assistants, which are typically like a nurse practitioner or physician assistants that work with the medical examiners, helping them do their autopsies and generate their reports. So that's been a real positive. The forensics lab, we're still having major backlogs there, trying to work through some of those issues. We had an outside consulting company come in and look at some of our operational management perspectives and seeing if there's ways that we can improve our time on turning around drug cases and other things. One of the byproducts of the medical marijuana bill is a lot of the private labs are opening up across the state, and they've hired some of our people, and they've gone from making 60 or 70,000 to almost 100,000 in some of these private labs. So we're competing with them for talent, and so that has become, I think, one of those challenges that we really didn't think about at the time. That is for us. Yeah. Thank you, Senator Hill. And but we're working internally, and we're trying to improve that. And y'all have increased salaries, and that's been a big help. And I've been meeting with the state personnel board on ways that we can improve that as well. So we got a lot going on at the Department of Public Safety. We did have a public safety summit last year, which I think is a positive thing. It's where we brought all first responders from fire, police chiefs, EMTs, sheriff association, state law enforcement, and held a public safety summit here in Pearl, where we were able to bring in a variety of speakers and do educational things where we're trying to bring all your first responders together in one meeting. The sheriff association meets, police chief association meets, fire academy meets, trooper association meets, but this was bringing them all together in one venue so that we could have some cross training and talk about things that are important for first responders in the future. We would ask that we get some funding in the future to keep doing that and allow the law enforcement officers that want to come and first responders that want to come free admission to it. We had to charge last year, and a lot of the local departments asked that we look at ways to help them pay for their folks to attend. So, and we worked hand in hand with the Attorney General's office on that, and we've, I think, done a lot of good things with partnerships, working with them on those types of events, and obviously working the officer-involved shootings. Looking forward to this legislative session coming up, we really don't have a lot of major asks. I mean, we've got some different cleanup language that we're looking for in a few things. One of them is the Medical Examiners Council that has been in effect for about 20 years. We'd like to look at revising that and maybe getting a task force to look at ways we can improve that entire system, from the coroners to the medical examiners, and trying to make it work better in our state. I can tell you one of the challenges we have at the medical examiner's office is recruiting doctors to come here. I personally have probably spent thousands of dollars my own money, trying to, when they come here and we're recruiting them, taking them out to eat, And, you know, even the chief medical examiner and myself, we're looking at ways to pay for plane tickets to bring them here. Because we don't have a recruiting budget, and it's not something I think that's allowed for under state law is money to pay for those types of things when you're trying to recruit folks like medical examiners to come to our state. So anything that y'all can do to help with that, and maybe this task force can look at recommendations on how we can recruit medical examiners. The reality is there's 500 forensic pathologists nationwide. So that's like 10 per state. But then when you look at the population of Mississippi, there's just not enough of them nationwide. And we got to find better ways to recruit and other professionals that can kind of fill that gap. I know I'm talking fast about a lot of different things and kind of apologize for that. But looking at the session coming up, one of the big things that I'm going to be asking for, and I've talked to Senator DeBar as well as the House about bringing in mandatory driver's education programs. We have spent a lot of time and justifiably so looking at school safety and minimizing active shooters and making sure that we're prepared for those types of threats. But the reality is in Mississippi, we lose far more teenagers to fatal car accidents than we do active shooters. And we are routinely number 1 or 2 in the country in teenage fatality rates in crashes in cars and on our highways. So having a 16-year-old driver, having one that's be getting his permit soon when he turns 15, I see the value in having a mandatory driver's education program. And I think our schools need to play a role in that, and we can work hand in hand through the Department of Public Safety with the Department of Education to come up with a driver's education curriculum that will hopefully prepare them to be better drivers and safer drivers. I would like to see a component of that also be a law enforcement interaction portion of the course. A lot of these young drivers, the first time they have any interaction at all with law enforcement is when they get pulled over on the side of the road. And we want to come in and let them know that we're here to ensure their safety. We're not their enemy, and just kind of let them meet law enforcement officers in a setting at a school or otherwise that will hopefully minimize some of that anxiety some of them feel the first time they encounter law enforcement. But that's going to be a big piece of legislation that we're asking for. We're also looking for pay raises for our highway patrol and MBN agents. The reality is 10 years ago, we would put out notice for patrol school. We'd have 1,500 applicants. That's down to about 300 to 400 applicants that apply. And so once we whittle it down, we usually are starting a class with anywhere between 50 and 70. And it's harder and harder to recruit individuals to go into the career in law enforcement, particularly the individuals that you want to pursue that career. Local departments in DeSoto County are starting off at around 60,000. Oxford, I think, is at about 55. Mississippi Highway Patrol starts at 50, which is a great salary. But if we're looking to compete, not only with some of the local jurisdictions in our state, but our neighboring states, which we are the lowest now, we need to get that starting salary up so that we can get the best of the best to come and be a part of our state law enforcement. So we'll be asking for that. We have we've got a kind of our DPS bill that has some minor changes to little things like an officer being able to keep their sidearm on retirement. One of the things that I've realized, you think it's just a firearm that a law enforcement officer has, but you got to remember they put that on themselves each and every day for years, and it almost becomes just a part of them. And once they do a career of service, I think that's the least that we can do is allow them to take their firearms with them that they've carried. We have some changes to our DUI laws that we're looking for some clarification on how those look in the code section. We think they can read a little bit clearer, particularly when we talk about the suspended license after somebody gets a DUI. We are looking for some permission for our credit union to operate. The Trooper Credit Union has been operating at headquarters for years, but there's never been any sort of formal lease agreement, and we have to get that approved by the legislature. We're asking for that. We're wanting to make, any time we have a lot of these families that are dealing in trafficking drugs and things like that, have children in the house, we'd like to see that be added as a felony child abuse. If you're dealing drugs and you have a child in the house, that it'll also be classified as child abuse. We are wanting to make some changes to the Board of Minimum Standards for law enforcement and require continuing education for all law enforcement officers. Um, the reality is that the Board of Minimum Standards does not have the staff to investigate allegations of police misconduct on its own. We rely on the sheriffs and police chiefs to report terminations, particularly if they're with calls, and then we can revoke those certificates. Obviously, with what's happened over the last year, and we've seen in Rankin County, there's a need for the Board of Minimum Standards to have enough investigators to go out and investigate allegations of police misconduct and revoke certificates, and not just rely on local departments always to turn that information in. The Board of Minimum Standards is made up of law enforcement officers. I think they'll tell you they'd like to have that oversight because they know that when you have these incidences where bad law enforcement officers do bad things, I mean, we had one on the coast recently who was, I think, embezzling money. It makes them all look bad. And that officer had already been revoked once, applied to have their certification reinstated, and that was granted. So we'd like to kind of toughen up the Board of Minimum Standards when it comes to that type of stuff. That's pretty much it. I'd be glad to answer any questions y'all might have about what's going on at DPS or any of these things that we're looking to introduce this year during the legislative session.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. That was a good, thorough overview. I think we do have some questions. Senator Simmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, it's always great seeing you, and I certainly admire your leadership at the agency. I was really particularly glad to hear about the pay raises proposal for our MBI agents as well as our state troopers. I know in the Delta, we've lost at least 3 troopers to Texas.
Yes.
And I'm hearing a lot about that. Even some of the ones that are still hanging on, they always remind me every year around this time, could you give us a pay raise? So I'm glad that that's one of your priorities, and I certainly would do everything I can to support that. My question is regarding the Capitol Police. You talked about the Capitol Police, and you were asking for funding for how many this session?
This session, our budget request, I believe, is 180.
180.
Like I said, we're sitting at 160. And what we've done since y'all tasked Capitol Police with being more of a true law enforcement division, we knew that the responsibility would be growing. And so the first year, I believe, we went from having 75 to, I think it was about 110 or 115. And if we've gone past that, we've come in and asked for deficit requests, knowing that we're trying to grow it, but you can't grow it all in 1 year. You've got to recruit. Some of them you have to put through a training academy, and that takes time. So again, we're asking for 180, but our intent is if we get to 180, we'd like to keep going until we get to that 200, 225.
And I know we never could actually pay for what our men and women in law enforcement do and the sacrifices that they make. And I know at the local level, we always hear about how our officers are overworked and underpaid. As far as the officers at the Capitol Police, are the salaries there competitive with what we are seeing in the area for other law enforcement in the area?
It's kind of that rising tide raises all the ships, right? So, I mean, we jumped out and Capitol Police was a little bit ahead, and then JPD said, you know what? We want to get in front of them, and so they got a little bit ahead of us, which I think is a great thing. Ultimately, I think that's a great thing for law enforcement to get those wages up. And let me say this. I've never been one. I don't like going to funerals. Never. Hadn't been my thing. And it's not something that before I took this job, I would routinely go to them. But being in this job, I've had to go to the spouses of law enforcement officers who've been killed in the line of duty and meet with the wives that day. And I've gone to numerous funerals across the state for law enforcement officers that died in the line of duty. You read about it in the paper and you see the headline and you move on with your life. I think until I got in this job, I did not appreciate the sacrifices that these families make, these officers make, and the positions they put themselves in, where they put their lives on the line in each and every day. And I've never seen any other profession, other than active duty military during war times, where people are dying at the rate law enforcement officers die. I mean, you can go look at that wall in front of the Supreme Court building, and we're adding 4 or 5 names every year. And it's, they're putting a lot on the line each and every day, and they deserve, when those things happen, and this is another thing that we're going to ask for funding for, is the ability to pay the funeral expenses for law enforcement officers, regardless if it was in line of duty. I've had to set up GoFundMes for all these law enforcement officers that die in the line of duty, because oftentimes the families don't have enough money to pay for it. And we have death benefits, but that takes 4 to 6 months to 2 years for those to come through. And we need to be able to take care of those families when these bad things happen. But before they happen, they need to be paid a wage that they can work full-time and then spend time with their kids, and spend time with their wives, and not have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Like the part-time deputy in George County, who was also working with a private company doing security and doing this. And so, again, they make a great sacrifice, and none of them do it for the money. They do it because they believe in what they're doing is the right thing, and they want to make their community safe. And we need to find better ways to support them. I'm sorry, I got on a little bit of a soapbox.
Very good.
It's been eye-opening to me.
Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got 2 questions. On the Capitol Police, how's the 911 situation going?
The last update I got from Chief Lucky, we were hopeful to have that up and going by July 1st when we expand. But I'd have to get an update for you and get back to you on where we are with that. So, you know, I can tell you one of the things that's difficult to navigate at times is state procurement laws as it pertains to creating a 911 system, and the time it takes to go through ITS and other things to get that lined up. Last year, y'all gave us the money for body cams. We thought we could, we met with the different vendors. ITS thought that we needed to bid it out through them, but we were able to do an emergency contract for Capitol Police. Otherwise, we would have had to wait 18 months. Had we not had body cams this past weekend, when Capitol Police was involved with an officer-involved shooting, that would have been, I think, really bad at this point not to have body cams. So with
And I was
911, we got to
specifically
work.
referencing the cooperation.
What's that?
The cooperation between JPD and Capitol Police.
Chief Lucky and I.
On the 911.
That's getting better. And we met with one of the deputy chiefs over there last week, and by doing some of these task force and other things, and also putting some of we're working on an MOU to put some of our folks at their real-time crime center. And, you know, we do have a system right now that's working not as efficiently as I'd like, but better when it comes to handling 911 calls that come in through their system and then letting us know and passing them on to us. But hopefully we'll have our own 911 call center set up.
My second question is, the statewide grand jury act is due for renewal. And it's under current law, it's very limited in scope for various reasons. It's an open-ended question, but with it being understanding it needs to be limited, is a statewide grand jury, are there needs that could be looked at for that?
I can tell you one of the needs that local law enforcement officer would tell you, and I think the AG's office would tell you, one of the challenges that we have on these officer-involved shootings is sometimes getting before a local grand jury to have that matter heard. You know, grand juries in some counties meet once every 3 months. And these officer-involved shootings, they need to be able to get on the docket, and they need to be able to be heard by a grand jury quicker than that. And so it might be that statewide grand jury system might be an opportunity to also include the officer-involved shooting aspect of it.
Because, okay, with the idea that it can be done, well, efficient, fast, and to get whatever the resolution may be quickly be it for the law enforcement, for the citizens, for the victims.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Senator Hickman?
Thank you, Commissioner. You've gone through a lot of information very quickly. Just a couple of questions, particularly about the ME's office. I think you said all of the backlog that you inherited is gone. Like, what's your current backlog though?
I'd have to get you our most updated numbers. I think the last time I looked at it, it was about 150.
And so what's the average? Is there average turnaround if a case comes into the ME's office? What's the average turnaround to get it out?
Again, I'd have to get those numbers for you and I can provide them. I can tell you, we've seen obviously a drastic improvement by eliminating the other backlog that we had. We've tried to institute a policy where you have to get them in and out within 90 days. That sometimes happens, it doesn't happen, depending on the additional forensic type evidence or blood samples that have to be done and information you might be waiting on from local law enforcement. I can get you the average number, but I can tell you, without getting you the number itself, it's drastically improved. But I'll be glad to get you what our average turnaround is sitting at right now.
Oh, yeah, I know the office has drastically improved, and we certainly appreciate that. And my final question about that is, you said you're currently recruiting. I think you said we have 3 MEs in the office currently. What would be the ideal size of that staff in that office?
Ideally, what I would like to have is 1 on the coast, 3 in central Mississippi, and 1, we've got a building in Oxford that we've gotten funding for. We're asking for authority to buy it. It's interesting in state government. You can get the money, but then you got to get the authority to buy it, or you get the authority, then you got to fund the money to buy it. Rarely do they both happen at the same time. We're trying to close on a facility in Oxford where we'll have a North Mississippi medical examiner's office. So would like to have a doctor there. 3 in central Mississippi, and again, one in south Mississippi.
And are the salaries that we paying comparable to like the Southeast and around us?
Yes, yes. It's one of the challenges when it comes to recruiting medical examiners is 500 nationwide. And we are working, and we've been in discussions with UMMC about them establishing a fellowship program for forensic pathology. So we're working together to try to find that person that can work on their staff as faculty, but also work at the medical examiner's office so that we can start a fellowship program for forensic pathology.
And finally, I guess this would be a comment. I'm guessing that you will, I think you said you're looking to get a task force, so you already have some people looking at what to do regarding the backlog in the forensic lab. And so I'm guessing you will get with us on what we need to do to assist you in getting that cleared up, because I know that has been a major problem. As a defense attorney, I love it. But as a state senator, not so much. So, any way we can help you with that, please.
It's very much a challenge. We've looked at contracting things out when it comes to the forensics lab to other private labs. But if they're not certified labs under the national standards, we can't contract out with. And so a lot of the local labs, they're not certified for doing criminal drug analysis. We have to send it off to other places a little bit further away to do that. Obviously, that creates a problem when those folks have to come and testify. So, the best case scenario is we figure out a way to hire more people, get them in, pay them well, and get these drugs and other things turned around in a timely fashion. But, drugs right now are running about 1.5 years backlog. It's a major problem. The one thing that, more than anything else, probably keeps me up at night at DPS is trying to figure out how to fix what's going on out there.
Senator England?
Hey, Commissioner, thank you for being here this morning.
Sure.
I have a question after talking with some of the circuit clerks lately, elections commissioners, with regard to when individuals will go, I guess, renew their driver's license and their address may change or something changes. So they have an option to check to update their voter registration to the new address. And there seems to be some, maybe a disconnect or some issue there with information getting from your office to the circuit clerk's office. And I'm not saying there's an issue. I want to know if you're aware of that, if you've had any talks with it, if there's anything that you think may help that issue moving forward, so we can make sure that individuals that either click a box or however they renew or change their voter registration, and then they show up on the day of the election at the polls, and they're told, well, we don't have your information. Election commissioners don't have it. Can you speak to that at all, or give
I
me?
know we had some of those issues come up during the last election cycle, and most of the ones that we were made aware of and looked into, somewhere along the way, whether it was the individual that was getting their license, maybe put some incorrect information on their new address, or somewhere along the way, our side was putting incorrect information in. It was causing some of these issues. So, we're working on that to make sure that it's better. But a lot of times, the information we might get from them, if they've put in a wrong street name or misspelled something or put lane instead of street, that can cause issues on where they actually are located in a particular area. So we're aware of it and trying to address it and make sure that, and I think those kind of things have probably been happening for a long time. I remember people getting purged off voter rolls 20 years ago, that for whatever reason got knocked off. So, and showed up and had to do an affidavit ballot. But we're trying to work on it. We've been made aware of it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we certainly can't legislate away user error on things, but if there's some easier issue, I'd just be interested to talk with you. And you've always been very willing to talk with me on many issues, and in fact, bringing this up just shows how many areas of people's lives your office touches, and so I appreciate you working with me on that.
I'll get you an update on that. I'll talk to Deputy Commissioner Davis and Treasurer Tyson, who's now the director over there, and kind of see where we are. I knew it was an issue, and I know they looked at some ways to address it.
All right, Commissioner, could you introduce for our new members your staff who are with you this morning and
Yeah,
tell
sure.
us what they do and how we interact with them?
Okay. Well, I've got Major Tad Pitts, who's here. He's been up at the Capitol, I guess, the last 6 years. How long you been up here? Yeah, he was on the speaker's detail for a while, and he's head of our external affairs division at Highway Patrol and DPS. And then during the session, he's obviously up here for security at the Capitol. But he's our government affairs liaison. We've got Brandon Poor. This is his first year with us. Y'all might have met Anthony Chancellor over the last couple of years. Anthony left the Department of Public Safety to run for sheriff in Clark County and was successful in that bid and is now the sheriff in Clark County. Brandon has taken his place as a legislative liaison and security here at the Capitol. And then I have Bailey Martin, who's our press secretary at the Department of Public Safety, and she's been with us for 2 years. Comes from Tupelo and formerly at the governor's office, and has been a valuable member of our team at the Department of Public Safety. I think that's it.
That's the group. All right. And welcome to all of y'all as well. We appreciate your help. Could you tell us about the number of troopers? I think we had talked about maybe the number of Capitol Police and others, but perennially we talk about how many troopers we have versus how many we need to have and how many retirements you're expecting in the next little bit.
Statutorily, we have authority for 650 Mississippi Highway Patrol. We have gotten as low as just below 400. And right now we're sitting at about 500. I think the highest we've ever had was around 2007, 2008. We were around 630 or 40 or so. We have been doing annual patrol schools for the last 6 years. We just started class 67. Started 2 weeks ago at Malota. But, we're doing the annual patrol school has been very much a benefit, but we went 10 years with only having one patrol school. So that's when our numbers really started going down. The annual patrol schools, we're getting the numbers up, but we're also having about 30 to 40 retirees or people leave annually. So these classes have just really been keeping us at par. I anticipate when we get to, again, that stretch where we only had one patrol school in 10 years, and we keep doing these annual schools, those numbers will start to rise. I think we need around 600. I was at Troop J not too long ago, and I was sitting down in our CAD system looking at the troopers we had working that morning. And over 9 counties, we had 4 troopers. And that's just not enough to patrol that many counties. And it's not safe. And so we really need to get I think those numbers up. Colonel Haynes, who most of y'all know, used to be the Capitol Security and worked as a legislative liaison, is now the colonel. He's very much a data-driven individual, and he's looking at different ways that we can get those numbers up and what our needs are and where we can put them. One of the good things about, I think, adding the outside NBI agents, again, we want to take the troopers that want to be investigators and put them at NBI if they have the ability and want to. But we're not just having to put people over there because we have to, because we can also look to bring from the outside. CTED also coming on board, working hand in hand with Highway Patrol, can also be a tool that we can utilize, particularly in major events when the ice storm and we need more law enforcement out on the road. I think it's been really good having the MDOT law enforcement working hand in hand with us at the same agency to kind of help fill that void. But ideally, I think we need to be hitting that 600 number when it comes to state troopers. And I'll tell you this, one of the things that we're seeing more and more, we have a hard time recruiting, local law enforcement has a hard time recruiting. We're getting more and more calls from municipalities, counties saying, we need your troopers this weekend. We don't have anybody that can work. We don't have any deputies, and we got to have some help with state law enforcement to come in and kind of fill that void while we're trying to fill these gaps in our own department. So, and we've done that on several occasions, and I imagine we'll see more and more of that as time goes on.
Great. Another thing that maybe is a testament to the success of the work you've done, we haven't really heard that much about, are the driver's license stations where people go, and we had all these horribly long lines, and you had to wait for days and still not get your driver's license renewed or whatever. Can you give us an update on the progress being made at the driver's stations?
You know, it's one of those things you have like we had with the ice storm, where the North Mississippi was essentially closed for 2 weeks, and then you open back up, and we have these long lines, but we've been closed for 2 weeks. So, but in general, our average wait times have gone from over 2 hours to hovering between 15 and 30 minutes, depending on the time of year and depending on if you make a reservation or not. So our Skip the Line campaign, where you can go online and make a reservation, has been a huge success. Typically, if you make that reservation, you're in and out in less than 15 minutes. And so that's been a huge success. Also looking at ways that we can minimize people having to come to the station themselves. When we first got there, if you wanted to renew your firearm permit, you had to physically come in, you had to renew in person, and you had to submit new fingerprints every 5 years. We've turned that into a system where you can download the application and mail it in. And, you know, when I got there, the question was, why do we have to get their fingerprints every 5 years? The fingerprints aren't changing. Let's just use their old fingerprints. And we found that was working. FBI was accepting the old fingerprints, so people are mailing in their firearm renewal permits, and they're not having to come to the driver's service station at that time. Online renewals has been a very positive thing, and where we want to go in the future is set up computer terminals, if you will, in our county courthouses, where people can come in and have like a virtual assistant, help them go through driver's license, you know, renewals and things like that, so that in essence, we would like to see where we expand our digital footprint and we start having to minimize our physical footprints, but our larger regional centers have more staff and can get people in and out more quickly, but we can serve more people online through AI and other technologies. And so that's where we're looking at in the future. But we've seen some drastic improvements. Again, a lot of help from y'all in helping getting those salaries up. You know, I got some stats yesterday that we had the most turnover at our driver service station. And you're talking about people that come in, they'll work a little bit, but then they go get another job somewhere else, making the same amount of money or more money, and now don't have to travel to a driver service station or deal with the stresses of that. So that's a high turnover when it comes to employees, but Treasurer Tyson and Deputy Commissioner Davis and the leadership have really done a good job of trying to improve morale, improve training, work on customer service, and I think we've seen a benefit. There's still work to be done, and we're working.
Right. One thing you had mentioned earlier in your testimony was that we've had a record number of homicides that it's, you know, causing the pipeline of the ME's office to be a little bit more stagnant. What do you attribute that to? Because when you hear about the national statistics from the past years post-pandemic, we all keep hearing that violent crimes are going way down. at least out of some of the national campaigns, leading up to the presidential race. Is that the case here in Mississippi? And if not, why?
I think they're going down now. For whatever reason, same with overdose deaths, you saw this spike after COVID. I want to say in 2018 or 2019, I'd have to look the numbers up, but I think we were under 400 homicides in Mississippi. 2021, I think, was the peak, or maybe 2022, but we were hitting around 600 homicides. So you're looking at a 33 to 50% increase in homicides in our state. Why is that? I don't know. But obviously, it's been a big issue. But I do think the numbers will show that they've gone down. And I don't have the final set of numbers for 2023, but I think we're seeing a decrease, even if it's a modest decrease in the number of homicides.
So what were the averages before the pandemic?
Again, I think in 2019, we did less than 400, and then we went to almost 600.
Wow. And percentage was, I mean, roughly, I know you don't have the exact numbers, but are these drug-related deaths? Or, I mean, homicides related to drug trade? Or is it domestic violence? Or, how would you critique the numbers?
I'll have to
of
get
homicides?
those numbers for you. I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, homicides in a lot of your urban areas have gone up. I could give you my thoughts, but they would just be guess, and I hate to give you some information based on just kind of my impressions, but not have the data to back it up. But I'll get that for you, so we can take a deeper look at that.
All right, Senator Norwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, not that I want to bring it back, but I just, a couple of years ago, we got rid of the $5 for the sticker. If we exit that budget, the money that we have collected, have we
Found a way to give that back to the Department of Public Safety, that was being collected. I don't, it's one of the challenges that we've had when the special funds got swept. I think the intent was that money would come in through general budget appropriations. In some incidences, I think it has. In some incidents, I don't think it has. Particularly, I know Malota, the Mississippi Law Enforcement Officer Training Academy, really struggles with not getting the special funds that it once did, and the Board of Minimum Standards that used to get a significant group of money through special funds. I don't know that those two divisions have been made whole. I think Highway Patrol and DPS has found ways to make up not getting the inspection stickers through other appropriations. But all that being said, I think all you have to do is ride up and down the interstate and highways and roads to think, well, maybe we ought to have some sort of inspection sticker. A lot of cars that are pretty bad shape.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
that's from a public safety standpoint, not a revenue generation standpoint. I mean, a real, concern for some of the vehicles that are out on the road, the shape they're in.
Thank you. And I would just like to say, as a part of the Jackson delegation, thank you for your commitment to being visible and working with us to try to bring these different coalitions together here with Jackson, JPD, the Sheriff Department, Capitol Police. And we're looking forward to getting you back out in the community, because some of the gaps that have been alluded to here, I think you have the right temperament to help get that taken care of. And I think some of the change in leadership here in the city has basically promoted that. So we look forward to getting with you to make that whole.
Chief Wade has been great to work with, and of course Sheriff Jones is really great to work with, and you as well. Thank you for inviting us into your communities to meet with folks. And I've told you, and I'll tell this committee, I mean, one of the things I think I was short-sighted in when we were looking to expand the roles of Capitol Police was our community outreach portion of that. And so since our initial meetings and some of the frustrations this community was had, We've obviously added officers that are community outreach officers, and they've tried to do a better job staying connected to the community. I was looking at it more as a state law enforcement perspective and failed to consider the community outreach aspect that's important of any local law enforcement agency. So thank you.
All right, other questions by committee members? It's been a really good back and forth, and I appreciate you doing that. My last question, I guess, would be, and you've sort of touched on this, but I know there's been some discussion over the years of y'all contracting with Ole Miss or William Carey, the medical schools, to try to help with the backlogs and serve as a teaching, apprenticeship type situation. Are you making progress on that, or is that something you're still looking into?
We're still looking into, we met with William Carey. Of course, they do a pathology program. They don't do a forensic pathology program. So that's one of the challenges is, pathology versus forensic pathology. But we have met with them, met with the head of their program. He came down and looked at what we were doing. We had some good conversations. And like I said, I've also met with UMMC. And we're looking, in fact, recently we were recruiting a young man that was graduating from the University of Alabama in Birmingham with a forensic pathology degree. He also had a degree in MD, and then he was also a neuroscientist. And they thought he would be great being on the faculty at UMMC and then also working with us at the crime lab, and we would split his salary. And that would be the starts of starting a fellowship for forensic pathology at UMMC. And that's really, I think, long-term where we find the success is if we're having a forensic pathology program at UMMC or William Carey, and we can partner with them to create a pipeline for future pathologists to work in our state. And, we're paying them about $300,000 for our pathology. That's a good salary. It might not be what they can make as a surgeon, which is, that's the challenge. Become a forensic board certified pathologist and do the fellowship. You're spending as much time as it would take to be an orthopedic surgeon. Orthopedic surgeons, I think in general, make more money than that. And so, and it's a certain person that takes on the calling of being a medical examiner. I mean, they're dealing with dead bodies every day. They're dealing with burnt bodies. They're dealing with children that have been killed. And that's what they see every day. And it's just not for many people. But if we can establish that program at UMMC and create a pipeline of doctors that are coming into our system at the medical examiner's office and working hand with UMMC, I think that's, or William Carey, I think that's where the people. Yes. And that was another thing that actually I thought about, and it might be something we look at considering the rural physician program where we pay if they agree to go and work in rural hospitals and rural communities once they complete their education at UMMC. Maybe we could look at sponsoring folks to go into forensic pathology and say, if you come and work at the medical examiner's office for 5 years, we're going to pay for your medical.
All right, great conversation and great updates. I appreciate you, Senator Hill.
I talked to, texting back and forth with Ken Winter, who's the executive director of the Police Chiefs Association, and I know Donna's here, and again, one of the big conversations we've had is working on the Board of Minimum Standards to revise that board so that we can come up with not just what the minimum standards are, but making sure we're doing consistent training across the state for law enforcement. And so whether you're a part-time or full-time, you ought to be getting the same training. And so we've got to figure out how to make that happen.
All right. Well, with that, we will thank the commissioner again and his staff for being with us this morning, and we'll do a motion to rise and report. All right. Thank you.